You're walking through dense brush at dusk. You hear rustling somewhere off to your left. You freeze completely still. Then you hear it again, closer this time, and something heavy is moving through the undergrowth toward you. You have no idea it's already, quietly, too late to run. Wild boars can hit speeds over 30 miles an hour in a straight line. You can't outrun that. Nobody can. Not even trained athletes can outrun that. Now imagine that's not a rare freak encounter. Imagine that's just an ordinary Thursday. For most of human history, that's exactly what it was. Wild boars have been sharing territory with humans for something like 700,000 years, give or take. That's not a typo. Long before modern humans even existed, earlier hominins were already running into these animals in the forests of Eurasia. And boars weren't just another animal on the landscape. They were, and still are, one of the most dangerous mammals a person can meet in the wild. Not because they're predators hunting you, because they're not. They're just enormous, fast, aggressive. Armed with tusks that can open a femoral artery in one motion. There's something almost unfair about that combination. A predator you can at least reason about, avoid its territory, understand its patterns. A boar just exists in the same space you need to walk through, minding its own business, until suddenly it isn't. So here's the real question, the one worth sitting with for a second. If humans have been living next to these things for hundreds of thousands of years, how did anyone survive long enough to build anything at all? Let's start with what actually makes a boar so dangerous, because you need to understand the threat before the survival story makes any sense. An adult wild boar can weigh over 300 pounds. Some historical accounts describe animals considerably larger. It has thick hide, dense muscle, and 2 sets of tusks, the lower ones razor sharp, that it uses less like a weapon and more like a self-sharpening blade, since the upper tusks grind against the lower ones every time its jaw moves. When a boar attacks, it doesn't bite the way a wolf or a bear does. It slashes upward with its head, then it tries to trample whatever's on the ground. You go down, and it keeps going. That's the part that should worry you. Most animal attacks end when you're no longer a threat. A boar attack often doesn't. Its skull alone is built like armor. Genuinely, like armor. The thick bone plate and dense cartilage across a boar's shoulders, sometimes called a shield, can deflect spear thrusts and even absorb blows that would kill most other animals its size. Pre-modern hunters weren't exaggerating when they described these things as nearly impossible to kill quickly. You could land a solid hit and the animal would just keep coming, adrenaline and rage carrying it forward through wounds that should have already ended the fight. Ask any experienced hunter today and they'll tell you the same thing modern research confirms. A wounded boar is often more dangerous than one that hasn't been hit at all, because now it has nothing left to lose and every reason to close the distance. A 2012 study that compiled documented boar attacks going back to 1825 found records of 665 human victims. That's just the well-documented cases from the last 2 centuries, in an era with guns, hospitals, and antibiotics. Push that pattern back into deep prehistory, when a bad gash from a tusk meant near certain infection and no real chance of treatment, and you start to understand why this animal shows up again and again in humanity's oldest stories. Here's a fact that should surprise you. For the first several 100,000 years that humans and boars shared the same landscape, we barely hunted them. A study of Paleolithic sites found that wild boar were dangerous enough that early hunters mostly left them alone, going after safer prey instead. Think about that. Early humans, who hunted mammoths, who hunted cave bears, who hunted animals that could crush a skull with one swipe, still looked at boars and decided the risk-to-reward ratio wasn't worth it most of the time. So what changed? Technology did, eventually. 3 things. Pits, projectiles, partners. On Tanegashima Island in Japan, archaeologists found rows of pit traps dug at least 30,000 years ago, arranged in long lines across flat terrain specifically to catch boar and deer as they moved along known paths. You didn't need to outrun the animal or outmuscle it. You just needed to make it fall into a hole you dug weeks earlier. That's the entire strategy. Simple, brutal, effective. And it worked well enough that similar trap systems show up independently across Central Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Entirely different cultures arriving at the exact same solution without ever talking to each other. When multiple unconnected groups of humans invent the same trick to survive the same animal, that tells you something about how serious the problem was. Natufian hunter-gatherers living in the Near East between roughly 12,500 and 9,700 BCE are among the earliest groups we have solid evidence for actually hunting boar with any regularity. What made the difference wasn't courage, it was equipment. Projectile weapons meant you could wound or kill from a distance, instead of getting close enough for the animal to reach you. Distance was everything back then, still is now. By the time you reach the pre-pottery Neolithic period, roughly 9,700 to 8,500 BCE, something even stranger starts happening at sites like Halan Chemi in Anatolia. Human communities weren't just hunting boar anymore. They were managing local populations, possibly encouraging certain animals to stay near settlements, an early, blurry line between hunting and something closer to farming. Settled villages produced food waste, and food waste attracted boar, which meant humans and boar were now living in closer proximity than ever before, for better and for considerably worse. Wild boar even made it to Cyprus by around 9,400 BCE, transported deliberately across open water, which tells you something remarkable. Humans were willing to load a dangerous animal onto a boat on purpose. That's either impressive planning or a spectacularly bad decision, possibly both. Domesticated dogs changed this entire relationship. A pack of trained dogs could surround a boar, keep it occupied, bite at its flanks, and exhaust it, all while staying just quick enough to dodge the tusks. Specialized catch dogs would grip the boar by the base of the ear and hold on, pinning its head down until a hunter could finish the job safely. Archaeologists have actually found ancient clay figurines depicting dogs cornering wild boars, which tells you this wasn't a minor detail. It was important enough that someone, thousands of years ago, decided it was worth memorializing in clay. You want to know the real MVP of ancient boar hunting? It wasn't the guy with the spear. It was the dog doing the dangerous part first. Think about what that partnership actually required. You had to trust an animal enough to send it directly at a creature that could disembowel it in seconds, and the dog had to trust you enough to hold that grip until help arrived. That's not a simple transaction. That's thousands of years of two species slowly learning to coordinate against a common threat, refined generation after generation until it became routine enough to paint on pottery. By the time you get to sites in China dating back to the Holocene climatic optimum, roughly the warm period following the last ice age, boar remains make up as much as 73% of all medium and large mammal bones found at some locations. That's an enormous reliance on one dangerous animal as a primary food source. A scale that dwarfs how often boar shows up in the archaeological record almost anywhere else in the world at that time. Which means somewhere along the way, humans didn't just learn to survive boars. They learned to systematically hunt an animal that could kill them, over and over, as a matter of routine. In some regions, eventually treating it as the default meal rather than the exception. That shift didn't happen because boars got safer. It happened because humans got better at not dying. Let's talk about the myths for a second, because ancient cultures didn't just survive boars quietly. They turned the fear into stories, and the stories tell you exactly how seriously this threat was taken. In Greek mythology, the Calydonian boar wasn't just an animal. It was a monster sent by the goddess Artemis specifically to punish an entire kingdom, trampling crops, killing people, and terrorizing the countryside until the king had no choice but to summon literally every famous hero in Greece to deal with it. Think about that for a second. Not one hero, an entire assembled task force, including Theseus, Jason, and the huntress Atalanta, all mobilized against a single boar. According to the myth, the boar managed to kill several of these elite warriors before anyone even landed a wounding blow, which tells you the ancient storytellers weren't interested in making this fight look easy. If you wanted a clearer signal of how much ancient people feared this animal, you'd struggle to find one. And it wasn't just myth padding either. Homer's Odyssey gives Odysseus a very specific, very real-sounding scar on his thigh, the result of a boar hunt gone wrong in his youth. A scar so distinctive, it's literally how his old nurse recognizes him decades later. Adonis, the mythological lover of Aphrodite, dies exactly the way real hunters sometimes died, gored by a boar despite every warning to stay away. These weren't abstract monsters invented for drama. They were exaggerated versions of a very real, very common way to die. Heracles got his own boar to deal with too, the Erymanthian boar, terrorizing the region around Mount Erymanthos as one of his 12 labors. His solution wasn't brute force, though, which is a little surprising for a guy famous for brute force. He chased the animal into deep snow, where its own weight worked against it, and captured it alive instead of just killing it outright. Even the strongest man in Greek mythology understood you don't just charge a boar head-on if you've got a smarter option available. That's not cowardice. That's just basic risk management, dressed up in a lion skin cape. The Romans took a completely different approach. Instead of just fearing boars, they turned hunting them into a rite of passage. Starting around the 3rd century BCE, young Roman men were expected to hunt boar as proof of courage and physical readiness for war. The Latin name for the animal, aper, or sometimes singularis, shows up constantly across Roman literature and art, far more often than in Greek sources. Wealthy Romans occasionally kept private boar reserves, breeding the animals specifically for the hunt. Less like survival, more like an extreme sport with real teeth. The strategy was more organized than you might expect. Hunters would surround an area with large nets, use dogs to flush the boar out of cover, and then immobilize it with smaller nets before finishing the job. It wasn't a fair fight, and it wasn't supposed to be. Nobody wanted a fair fight with something that could disembowel you in 3 seconds. By the time of Emperor Constantine, boars had picked up a genuinely ominous nickname in Roman culture, the Black Beast. Not exactly a term you'd use for something harmless. Here's the part that's easy to miss, though. This wasn't ancient people being dramatic for no reason. Modern data backs up exactly what they were afraid of. That 2012 study on boar attacks found something specific and important. Most attacks weren't happening during organized hunts at all. They were happening in ordinary, non-hunting situations, rural areas, winter months, people just going about their day when an animal that outweighed them charged out of nowhere. You know what that means? The ancient fear wasn't superstition. It was accurate risk assessment, encoded into myth because myth was the best data storage technology available at the time. None of this protection was ever complete, and it's worth being honest about what daily life near boar territory actually involved. Crops got destroyed regularly, livestock got killed, and people got hurt, sometimes fatally, in encounters that had nothing to do with hunting at all, just someone walking the wrong path at the wrong moment, exactly like the scenario you pictured at the start of this video. Medieval Europe leaned even further into treating the boar as something almost supernatural in its danger. Wild boar populations were, somewhat counterintuitively, abundant across medieval forests, well documented in tribute records from noble families and the clergy who demanded a share of the meat. But hunting them stayed a privilege of the elite. During the Renaissance, boar hunting in parts of Europe was restricted specifically to nobility. Partly out of practicality, since you needed horses, dogs, and trained huntsmen, most peasants simply couldn't afford. Partly because surviving a boar hunt was still, centuries later, treated as genuine proof of status and courage. It's worth pointing out how strange that is. An animal so dangerous that only the wealthiest, best-equipped people in society were even allowed to legally hunt it. Everyone else just had to live next to the danger and hope for the best. Which raises an obvious question. What happened to everyone who wasn't nobility, who still had to farm land right next to boar territory with none of that specialized equipment? Mostly, they just accepted the risk as background noise in daily life, the same way you might accept the risk of a car accident today without thinking about it every time you drive. Fences where they could afford them, dogs where they could keep them, and a lot of quiet, practical knowledge passed down about which paths to avoid at dusk when boars are most active, and which patches of forest to simply leave alone. For those who could afford real equipment, medieval engineers eventually solved one very specific, very gruesome problem. Early boar spears killed the animal, sure, but a dying, enraged boar could still drive itself further down the shaft toward the hunter before it finally went down, using its own momentum to close the gap even as it bled out. The solution was a crossbar. A simple metal bar fitted just below the spearhead, specifically to stop the boar's body from sliding any closer. You can tell a lot about how dangerous people considered an animal by which of their weapons got a safety feature added specifically because of it. Boar spears got one. Most hunting spears never needed it. There's an even stranger twist buried in this whole story, and it's one you've probably never thought about. Every single domestic pig on every farm on the planet is, genetically, the same species as the terrifying animal in the Calydonian myth. Sus scrofa. Same DNA. Wildly different outcome. Somewhere between roughly 9,700 and 8,500 BCE, at sites like Halanchemi in Anatolia, human communities started managing local boar populations closely enough that some scholars debate whether it counts as early domestication or just very intensive hunting. Either way, humans took one of the most dangerous animals they regularly encountered and, over thousands of years, bred an entirely different branch of it into something that mostly just wants to nap and eat slop in a pen. You've probably eaten bacon this week without once connecting it to a monster that took down Greek heroes. This is the part of the story that's genuinely hard to sit with. Boar attacks haven't gone away. They've just changed shape. That same 2012 study found something specific about where modern attacks cluster geographically. The highest documented number happened in the United States, about a quarter of all recorded cases. India came close behind at roughly a fifth, and notably, India's attacks were the largest share occurring within the animal's actual native range, meaning people living alongside boar territory the way humans have for hundreds of thousands of years. Modern conflicts usually happen because of territory encroachment and deforestation, humans pushing further into wild spaces, and boars pushing back into farmland and even suburban areas as their traditional habitat shrinks. Same conflict, new map. Boar attacks today spike during the rut, roughly November through February, exactly the season ancient hunters would have recognized as the dangerous months too. Some things about this animal simply haven't changed in 10,000 years. And there's a strange twist to the modern story that the ancient world never had to deal with. Much of the wild boar population across the Americas today isn't actually wild in the original sense at all. European explorers introduced them centuries ago as a food source. A huge number of today's wild boar encounters are actually feral pigs, domestic animals that escaped captivity and went wild again. Some interbreed with genuine wild boar to produce something even more aggressive and even harder to manage. There are now estimated to be more than 6 million feral swine across at least 35 U.S. states alone, and estimated agricultural damage from these animals runs into the billions of dollars annually in the United States. You read that right. Billions. From an animal that started out as somebody's dinner plan. Modern hunters have had to get considerably more creative to deal with the scale of the problem, using everything from specialized box traps to coordinated dog-assisted hunts, eerily similar to what Roman hunters were doing 2,000 years ago, just with trucks and radios added instead of togas and spears. Some things really don't need reinventing. The ancient threat never really disappeared. It just picked up new territory, using humanity's own farming history against us, which puts the entire arc of this story into a strange perspective. For roughly 700,000 years, humans and boars have been locked in the same basic negotiation. Avoid them when you can't win, hunt them once you've got the tools to win safely. Fear them enough to turn the fear into stories, gods, and rites of passage that shaped entire cultures. Nobody solved this problem permanently. Nobody ever fully domesticated the danger out of the wild version of this animal, even after domesticating an entirely separate, much friendlier branch of the same species into the pig you'd recognize on a farm today. Two branches, same creature. One turned into Sunday breakfast, the other still capable of ending your life in under a minute. So the next time you hear rustling in the brush and your whole body tenses before your brain even catches up, you're not overreacting. You're running an alarm system built across hundreds of thousands of years of very good reasons to be afraid of exactly that sound. Somewhere in the deep, wordless part of your brain, you already know what your ancestors learned the hard way, over and over, for longer than civilization itself has existed. Some animals you don't outrun. You just try not to meet them in the first place.